Shalom. Thanks for joining me today. When I was growing up back in the 50s, I got exhilarated because I lived in a culture where there were a lot of horror movies, okay? And things like the Blob and the Brain Eaters and vampires and Dracula and Frankenstein. There was one, the Giant Claw, where it was this big, huge eagle that would come down with the giant claws and would pick up people and stuff. And it would excite me, it would exhilarate me. But sometimes it would take me over the edge where I couldn't handle the fear that would bring on beyond the excitement of the horror. And I do remember the first time I watched The Wizard of Oz, I was over my grandmother's house, and that's my dad's mom. And she wasn't too particular about me watching it anyhow because she knew what it was. But at one point, and I think it was a point when they showed the witch that was up underneath this shack or building, and it just was her feet sticking out. And I got to hollering and screaming. Grandmama turned off the TV, and she gave me what was her remedy for calming down children and getting them to sleep. And there was some warm milk with some honey in it. Okay. And so it was some years later before I was able to watch all the way through The Wizard of Oz. It just had too much in there for my excited mind. So one of the places we moved around a lot in my childhood, and one of the places that we moved to was over on Parkside on the west side of Detroit. And some of the children, because there was a lot of children in that area, and at that time, it's a community because our street wasn't really a thoroughfare street, and the trees from one side, the branches hooked with the trees on the other side, so it was a really nice place. But some of the children must have figured out Sharon gets scared easily, okay? And so what they would tell me is that before you all moved into that house, Wild Man Willie lived in your garage. Okay. And so that would bother me, that Wild Man Willie might come back. And it particularly bothered me because my mother worked, and we were sort of, we really weren't called that then, but many years later they called them latchkey kids. That my mama hung a rope around our neck with the key to the house on it because she wasn't home when we got home from school. And so when we came home from school, and sometimes more than others, depending on what people are talking about, that Wild Man Willie, I'm peeking out the curtains. I didn't close the curtains at the house, and I got a fork in my hand. Now I look back on that and said, "Why I have a fork?" And it must have been because I was told you don't play with knives, and I was figured if I had to attack Wild Man Willie, I'd rather try to stick him with a fork, because if he grabbed it from me, I'd rather get stuck with a fork than get stuck with a knife. Okay, so just childhood mind just gone. Okay. So there were times when we would stay with my grandmother, and that's my mom's mother. Okay. And now this is when we were actually living with her at one point, and this was over on Verner Highway on the east side of Detroit. And so the children there was a large cemetery that was about a block away from us called the Elmwood Cemetery. And people would say that at night, Haints would come out, and one of them was Old Man Jones, okay? And so my grandmother didn't put up with a whole lot of nonsense, so she heard us maybe a couple times talking about this. So she said, we're going to put a stop to this. When it get near dusk at night, we're going over into that cemetery, okay? And we're going to see if Mr. Jones is coming out. So my sister and I and a girl down the street, Carol, I think her name was Carol Brown, we said we were going to go over there. And so, we were a little apprehensive about going over there into this cemetery. The cemetery, it must have been like a mile long from the entrance that was close to us to the other end. So it was a big cemetery. So we went in there, and so we, timidly were saying, "Mr. Jones, oh, Mr. Jones," and then and nothing was happening. And my grandmother said, "See," and so then we got to running through there and just hollering, "Oh, Mr. Jones, come on out, blah, 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 blah," Okay, now for my Torah keeping friends. Okay. This was long before Torah because would not have been in a cemetery under no circumstances like that. Okay, so you understand that because that's 7 days unclean. But anyway, back in those days, we were there. So we were feeling pretty good about that. And so Grandma said, well, it's time for us to go on home. But when we went back, the gate was locked. Okay, now you talking about three little children kind of panicking because I ain't want, even though old man Jones, we didn't, he wasn't nothing there and we hadn't seen any haints, but who wants to spend the night in the cemetery? Because that's all my man can think, the gate locked and I can't get out. Okay, so Grandma said, well, let's walk back toward the other and see if the other gate is locked too. So as we were walking, that now the fence around the cemetery is those tall wrought iron fences that the stakes in them is probably about this big, but somehow, some way, uh, two of them got pushed in. Okay, and so it was just enough for the us three girls to skimmy through there and to get out. When Carol got out of there, she shot home. Okay. So my sister and I, we know we couldn't leave my grandmother there in the cemetery. So we walked along the edge and she walked along to the gate. And as she was walking, and we didn't have to walk very far, one of the cemetery workers in one of the trucks or car, I forget, picked her up and took her to the other gate, let her out, and then brought her back to us. And so my grandmother wanted us to know that we have to confront our fears in order to resolve them. And I was really glad for that experience because I understood that just because somebody says something, that doesn't mean it. And then now, as a believer and a walker in faith and a believer of the scriptures, I understand that fear is not something that Jehovah has given us. So if there's anything that you're fearful about, just stop a moment and think about it and confront it, and then find scripture that will help you to be able to resolve that fear and to let it go. Okay. And one of my verses that I go to a lot to know that fear is not something the Father gives me is 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. I hope that helps somebody today because it always helps me. Shalom, and please remember to like and share.